said silence was golden, but for Dante Vanzini, the most feared man in New York, silence was a curse. His 6-year-old daughter hadn't spoken a single word in 3 years, not since the night her mother died. Specialists failed. Doctors gave up. Even the Vanzini crime family's billions couldn't buy her voice back. Then came a rainy Tuesday, a run-down diner, and a waitress with nothing to lose. She didn't use therapy or medicine. She used a bottle of cheap chocolate syrup. What happened next didn't just break the silence, it started a war. This is the story of how a simple heart, drawn on a pancake, brought the Mafia to its knees. The rain in New York City didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. It was 10:00 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Marino's, a mid-tier diner on the edge of the meatpacking district, was unusually quiet. The regulars, mostly dock workers, and retired beat cops had scattered the moment the black SUVs pulled up to the curb. Clara wiped the counter with a rag that had seen better days. She was 24, tired, and owed more money in student loans than she made in a year. She was a semester short of a degree in child psychology, a dream she'd abandoned when her own mother got sick. Now she served lukewarm coffee and tried to stay invisible. But invisibility was impossible when Dante Vanzini walked through the door. The air in the diner changed instantly. It grew heavier, colder. Dante was a man carved from marble and regret. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than the diner's annual lease, and his eyes were dark, scanning the room for threats before he even looked at the hostess. Flanking him were 2 men who looked like they chewed glass for breakfast, Marco, his right-hand man, and a younger guard named Luca. But Clara's eyes weren't drawn to the men. They were drawn to the little girl holding Dante's hand. Sofia Vanzini. 6 years old. She wore a pristine white coat that looked terrified of the grease in the air. Her face was a perfect porcelain doll's mask, blank, emotionless, and hauntingly still. "Table 4, Dante said. His voice was a low rumble, the kind that vibrated in your chest. It wasn't a request. Old man Marino, the owner, was shaking as he grabbed menus. "Of course, Mr. Vanzini. Right this way. The booth in the back is private." Clara watched them go. The diner was empty except for them. The bodyguards took up positions, one at the door, one near the kitchen. Dante sat opposite the little girl. "Clara," Marino whispered, rushing back to the counter, his face pale. "You take them. My hands are shaking too much. Just don't mess up. Please. You know who that is?" "I know," Clara said, tightening her apron. Everyone knew who Dante Vanzini was. The tabloids called him the Iron King of the East Coast underworld. The police called him untouchable. Clara grabbed her notepad and walked to the back booth. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced a professional smile. As she approached, she saw the dynamic at the table. It was heartbreaking. Dante was leaning forward, his intimidating demeanor softened into desperation. "Sophie Tesoro," he said softly. "You have to eat something. Just a little. Please." The girl Sophia stared at the laminated tabletop. She didn't blink. She didn't look at him. She was a statue. Clara stepped up. "Good morning. Can I start you gentlemen, and the young lady, with some coffee or juice?" Dante looked up. His eyes were a piercing blue, startling against his olive skin. For a second, Clara felt like he was reading her entire history, the debts, the dropped classes, the loneliness. "Black coffee," Dante said, his voice hardening again as he addressed a stranger. "And orange juice for her, fresh squeezed, no pulp. And to eat? Clara asked. She won't eat, Dante said, the exhaustion bleeding into his tone. Just bring her a plain pancake. Maybe she'll look at it. Clara looked at the girl. She recognized that look. In her clinical rotations, she had seen it in foster kids who had shut down after trauma. It wasn't stubbornness. It was a fortress. The girl was locked inside herself because the outside world was too painful. I'll bring the pancakes, Clara said softly. But maybe she'd like strawberries on them. Sophia didn't move. Dante waved a hand dismissively. Just bring it. Clara walked back to the kitchen, her mind racing. She knew she should just do her job. Drop the check and get the tip. But the look in that little girl's eyes. It was the same look Clara's mother had in the hospice ward before the end. The look of someone waiting for permission to let go. Order up. The cook, breathless with anxiety, slid the plate onto the window. A single plain pancake. Clara stared at it. This won't work, she thought. He's trying to force her to be normal. You can't force safety. She looked around. Marino was hiding in the office. The bodyguards were watching the street. Clara grabbed the industrial-sized bottle of chocolate syrup from the dessert station. What are you doing? The cook hissed. He said plain. I know what he said, Clara muttered. She took a deep breath. Her hand was steady. She didn't just drizzle the syrup. She drew. She used the nozzle like a pen. On the center of the pancake, she drew a perfect, intricate heart. But she didn't stop there. Inside the heart, she drew a small, sad face, and outside the heart, she drew a sun. It was a technique she'd learned in her art therapy for non-verbal children class. Externalize the emotion. She carried the plate out. The bodyguard Marco stepped in front of her. I need to check that. It's a pancake, Marco, Clara said, surprised by her own boldness. Unless you think I hid a wire in the batter, let me pass. Marco blinked, stunned by the sass, and stepped aside. Clara placed the plate down in front of Sophia. Dante looked at the chocolate mess. His jaw tightened. I said plain. I know, Clara said. She didn't look at the mob boss. She looked directly at the child. She crouched down, ignoring the unspoken rule that you never get on eye level with a Vancini unless invited. Sophia, Clara whispered. The girl's eyes flickered. She looked at the pancake. She saw the sad face inside the heart. It's okay to be sad inside, Clara said, her voice barely a murmur. Even when the sun is out. Dante looked ready to explode. Miss, I don't pay you to... He stopped. Sophia had reached for the fork. The entire diner seemed to hold its breath. Even the bodyguards turned to look. The girl's small, trembling hand gripped the utensil. She didn't eat the pancake. Instead, she dipped her finger into the chocolate syrup of the sad face and smeared it, turning the line upward into a smile. Then she looked at Clara, and then a sound, rusty quiet, barely there. Son, Sophia whispered. The silence shattered. Dante Vancini froze. The color drained from his face. He looked from his daughter to the waitress, his mouth slightly open. 3 years. 3 years of silence broken by a waitress in a grease-stained apron. Clara smiled, tears pricking her eyes. Yeah, she said. It's the sun. Dante stood up slowly. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. He towered over Clara. She stood up suddenly, realizing she might have just crossed a line that would get her killed. Who are you? Dante demanded. Clara, she stammered. Just Clara. Dante looked at her. really looked at her for the first time. He didn't see a waitress anymore. He saw a miracle worker. "Get your coat, Clara," Dante said. "Excuse me, you're done here," he said, pulling a wad of $100 bills from his pocket and throwing them onto the table easily, $5,000. "You're coming with me." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Clara said, backing up until her hips hit the counter. The rush of the breakthrough with the child was replaced by cold, hard fear. This was a kidnapping. Marco, the large bodyguard, stepped forward, blocking her path to the kitchen. "The boss asked you to come." "He told me to come." Clara corrected her voice, trembling but defiant. "There's a difference." Dante watched her interaction with his men. Most people cowered. Clara was shaking, yes, but she was standing her ground. He liked that. He needed that. "I apologize," Dante said, his voice smoothing out, shifting from the capo to the businessman. "I'm not used to asking, but I am asking. My daughter. She hasn't spoken since the accident. Since my wife died. 3 years, Clara. I have hired the best doctors in Switzerland, the best therapists in New York. Nothing. You drew a picture, and she spoke." He gestured to Sophia, who was now quietly eating the pancake, tracing the chocolate lines with her fork. She looked peaceful for the first time in years. "I need you to work for me," Dante said. "Name your price." Clara shook her head. "I'm not a therapist. I'm a waitress. I didn't finish my degree." "I don't care about degrees." Dante snapped, his patience fraying. "I care about results. I'll pay you $10,000 a week. You live at the estate. You provide companionship and therapy for Sophia." Clara gasped. $10,000 a week? That would pay off her mother's medical debts in a month. It would clear her student loans in 2. But the Vancini estate. That was the fortress in Long Island where people went in and didn't always come out. "I can't," Clara said. "I have a life here." It was a lie. She had a cat and an empty apartment in Queens. Dante stepped closer. He smelled of expensive cologne and gun oil. "Clara, look at her." Clara looked. Sophia had stopped eating and was watching Clara, a look of panic starting to return to her eyes as she realized Clara was leaving. "She chose you," Dante said quietly. "Don't walk away from a child who needs you." It was a low blow, a manipulative, dirty tactic, and it worked perfectly. "I have conditions," Clara said, surprising herself. Dante raised an eyebrow. "Conditions? I don't live there. I commute. I want weekends off, and no guns around me, or the girl when we are working." The bodyguards chuckled. Dante didn't smile. "You'll live there because it's the only way to ensure your safety once you're associated with me," Dante said. "Weekends off, fine. As for the guns, my men protect my family. If you are part of the household, they protect you too. That is non-negotiable." Clara looked at Marino, the diner owner, who was frantically nodding at her to say yes, so these dangerous men would leave his shop. "Fine," Clara whispered. "I'll pack a bag." "We'll buy you new things," Dante said, turning on his heel. "Marco, escort her to the car. We leave now." The ride to Long Island was silent. Clara sat in the back of the armored SUV facing backward, watching the city shrink away. Sophia sat next to her, clutching a stuffed bear. Dante was in the front on the phone, speaking rapid-fire Italian. Clara caught snippets. "Traditore traitor. Trovatelo. Find him." She shivered. She had walked out of a diner and into a war zone. They arrived at the Vancini estate just as the sun was setting. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress. High stone walls, iron gates, and armed guards patrolling the perimeter with German shepherds. As the car pulled into the circular driveway, the front door opened. An older woman in a housekeeper's uniform stepped out, looking anxious. This was Eleanor Waite. "No," the user said. "No names." "Elena." This was Rosa, the head housekeeper. "Mr. Dante," Rosa said, rushing to the car door. "Thank God you're back. There was a call." Dante stiffened. He stepped out of the car, adjusting his cuffs. "What call?" "From the West Side boys," Rosa whispered, glancing fearfully at Clara. "They know you're looking into the leak." Dante's face went hard. He turned to Marco. "Take Clara and Sophia to the East Wing. Lock it down. No one in or out unless I authorize it." "Wait," Clara said, stepping out onto the gravel. "What leak is she in danger?" Dante turned to her. The look in his eyes was terrifyingly intense. He reached out and for a brief second touched her arm. His hand was warm, his grip firm. "You're in my world now, Clara," he said. "Everyone is in danger. But as long as you get her to talk, as long as you save my daughter, I will burn the world down to keep you safe." He walked away towards the main office, barking orders at his men. Clara stood in the driveway, the wind whipping her hair. She looked down at Sophia. The little girl reached up and took Clara's hand. "Son," Sophia whispered again. Clara squeezed the small hand. "Yeah, sweetie. We're gonna find the sun." But as she looked up at the looming mansion with its dark windows and armed guards, Clara knew the sun didn't shine much in the Vancini world. She had just walked into the shadows, and somewhere in those shadows, someone was watching. Up on the 3rd floor, a curtain moved, just a fraction. Someone was watching their arrival. Someone who didn't want Sophia to talk. Because if the little girl spoke, she might reveal the secret that got her mother killed. Clara wasn't just a nanny anymore. She was a target. The first week at the Vancini estate felt less like a job and more like living in a museum where you weren't allowed to touch the exhibits. The East Wing designated for Sophia and Clara was a sprawling suite of rooms filled with antique French furniture, silk drapes, and a silence so thick it felt heavy in the lungs. Clara quickly learned that the Vancini household operated on a schedule of military precision. Breakfast at 8:00 a.m. sharp, security check at 9:00 a.m., tutors who were currently suspended at 10:00 a.m. But Clara threw the schedule out the window on day 1. "We aren't doing lessons in the study," Clara announced to Rosa, the head housekeeper, on Wednesday morning. Rosa, a stout woman with a face etched by years of worrying about Dante, looked horrified. "Mr. Dante insists on the study. It is secure," Rosa argued, wringing her hands in her apron. "The study is dark and smells like old cigars," Clara countered. "We're going to the solarium. Sophia needs light. If she's going to speak, she needs to feel like she's not in a prison." Clara took Sophia's hand. The little girl was clutching her stuffed bear, a tattered thing named Mr. Cuddles that looked out of place against her expensive velvet dress. Sophia looked up at Clara, her eyes wide. She hadn't spoken a word since the sun incident at the diner, but she hadn't let go of Clara's hand either. They moved to the solarium, a glass-walled room overlooking the manicured gardens. It was beautiful, but Clara noticed the grim reality immediately. The glass was bulletproof, thick and distorted at the edges, and 2 armed guards stood outside in the rose bushes, pretending to look at the flowers, while their hands hovered near their waistbands. Clara set up a station on the floor. not a table the floor. She laid out butcher paper paints, crayons, and bottles of chocolate syrup. "Okay, Sophia." Clara sat cross-legged, ignoring how her jeans pulled tight. "Today we aren't talking. Talking is hard. Today we make a mess." Sophia hesitated. In this house, messes were cleaned up instantly. Messes were forbidden. Clara squeezed a blob of bright blue paint onto the paper. Then she stuck her entire hand in it and slapped a blue handprint onto the page. Sophia gasped, a tiny, audible intake of breath. "Your turn." Clara grinned. It took 10 minutes, but eventually, Sophia Vancini, the heiress to the biggest crime syndicate in New York, was covered in paint. She was giggling, a soundless shaking motion of her shoulders as she smeared yellow and green across the paper. It was in this moment of chaotic joy that the door opened. It wasn't Dante. It was a man Clara hadn't met yet. He was younger than Dante, perhaps late 20s, with slicked-back blonde hair and a suit that was too shiny, too trendy. He had a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well, well," the man said, stepping over a puddle of chocolate syrup. "I heard Dante brought home a stray, but I didn't realize she was running a daycare." Sophia instantly froze. The joy evaporated. She scrambled backward, hiding behind Clara. Clara wiped her paint-covered hands on a rag and stood up, placing herself between the man and the girl. "And you are Julian Rossi," he said, extending a hand. "The consigliere, or as I like to say, the guy who cleans up the messes Dante makes. I'm Dante's cousin." Clara didn't shake his hand. "We're in the middle of a session, Mr. Rossi. It's private." Julian laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Nothing in this house is private, sweetheart. Everything is watched. Everything is recorded." He took a step closer, invading her personal space. "Dante seems taken with you. He's usually more discerning with the help. What's your angle gold digger undercover cop?" "Waitress," Clara said coldly. "Now please leave. You're scaring her." Julian looked at Sophia, his expression unreadable. For a second, Clara thought she saw a flash of annoyance, or was it fear in his eyes when he looked at the child? "She doesn't scare easily," Julian muttered. "She's a Vancini. We don't get as scared. We get even." "Julian." The voice came from the doorway. It was Dante. He had returned early. He was in his shirt sleeves, his tie undone, looking like he'd just come from a brawl. His knuckles were bruised. "Dante!" Julian's demeanor flipped instantly. He smiled, backing away. "Just welcoming the new guest. Checking on the princess." "Get out," Dante said. Low. Dangerous. Julian held up his hands in surrender. All right. Touching base, that's all. We have the shipment coming in tonight at the docks. I needed your signature on the transfer orders. Leave the papers in my office, and stay out of the East Wing, Dante growled. Julian gave Clara a wink and slipped out the door. The tension in the room remained high. Dante looked at the mess on the floor. The paint, the syrup, the ruined, expensive rug. Clara held her breath, waiting to be fired. Dante walked over to the painting. He crouched down, ignoring the risk to his Italian dress pants. He looked at the chaotic swirl of colors. "Isabella used to paint," he said softly, almost to himself. "She loved watercolors. She tried to teach Sophia before." He trailed off. He looked up at Clara. The anger from the encounter with Julian was gone, replaced by a profound weariness. "Did she speak?" "No," Clara said honestly. "But she laughed, without sound. But she laughed." Dante closed his eyes, exhaling a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. "Thank you." Your cousin, Clara said, deciding to be brave. He scares her. Dante's eyes snapped open. The ice returned. Julian is family. He's annoying, he's ambitious, but he's family. He was with us the night Isabella died. He drove the car that got Sophia to safety. Clara bit her lip. Sophia hid behind me when he walked in. A child's instinct is rarely wrong, Dante. It was the first time she had used his first name without Mr. Dante stood up, towering over her. The proximity was dizzying. Be careful, Clara. You're here to fix her heart, not to critique my organization. Julian is loyal. Is he? Clara challenged. Because he just told me that nothing here is private. That implies he's watching. If he's watching me, he's watching her. Why does a 6-year-old need to be watched by her own cousin? Dante stared at her. The silence stretched, charged with an electricity that Clara couldn't quite name. It wasn't just fear. It was attraction. He was a dangerous man, a killer, but the way he defended his daughter made Clara's chest ache. I watch everyone, Dante said finally, because I can't lose anyone else. He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. Dinner is at 7 tomorrow. Formal dining room. You'll eat with me. Both of you. I thought I was the help, Clara said. Dante looked back over his shoulder, his eyes sweeping over her paint-splattered jeans. Tonight, you're not the help. Tonight I need someone at the table who isn't trying to kill me or ask for money. As he left, Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. She looked down at Sophia. The little girl had picked up a black crayon. While the adults were arguing, Sophia had drawn a new picture. It wasn't a heart. It was a car, a black car. And in the window of the car she had drawn a stick figure with yellow hair. Yellow hair. Like Julian, and in the stick figure's hand, a red, jagged line. A gun. Clara's blood ran cold. Dante said Julian drove the car that got Sophia to safety. But Sophia's drawing didn't look like a rescue. It looked like a threat. Clara quickly folded the paper and tucked it into her pocket. She couldn't show Dante yet. Not until she was sure. If she accused his cousin without proof, she'd be on the street or worse at the bottom of the Hudson River. She needed to know what happened the night Isabella died. And she had a feeling the only person who could tell her was the silent girl sitting in the paint. Dinner was a surreal affair. The dining room was long enough to play bowling and lit by a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than Clara's entire childhood home. Dante sat at the head Sophia on his right and Clara on his left. Dante had showered and changed into a black tuxedo shirt, unbuttoned at the top. He looked less like a mob boss and more like a weary prince. Clara had changed into the only nice dress. She had brought a simple navy blue wrap dress. The conversation was stilted. Dante asked about the therapy. Clara talked about color theory. Sophia ate her pasta one noodle at a time, watching her father. Why do you do it? Clara asked suddenly, breaking the polite silence. Dante paused his wine glass halfway to his lips. Do what? This. Clara gestured to the room, the guards outside the opulence. The life. You have enough money to leave. To go to, I don't know, New Zealand. Raise sheep. Why stay in a world where you have to check your car for bombs? Dante set the glass down. It's not a job, Clara. It's a legacy. My father built this. His father built this. If I leave, the vacuum of power destroys the city. Gangs who don't have our code will take over. I keep the chaos in check. A noble monster, Clara murmured. Dante smiled, a rare, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. Exactly. Suddenly the lights flickered. The chandelier dimmed, then surged brightly, then went out completely. The room was plunged into darkness. "Down!" Dante roared. Before Clara could process the command, Dante had lunged across the table. He didn't go for a weapon. He went for Sophia. He grabbed his daughter and pulled her under the heavy oak table. "Clara, get her down." Clara dropped to the floor, just as the sound of shattered glass erupted. A window in the far corner blew inward. Pop, pop, pop. Silenced gunshots. They were taking fire. "Marco!" Dante shouted into his lapel microphone. "Status. Breach in the north garden jammer is blocking the alarms. We're coming in." Marco's voice crackled through the earpiece. Dante grabbed Clara's arm, dragging her under the table with them. It was a tight squeeze. The three of them were huddled in the dark, the smell of roasted garlic and gun smoke mixing in the air. Sophia was shaking violently. She buried her face in Dante's chest. Dante had one arm wrapped around his daughter, the other hand gripping a sleek black pistol he had drawn from a holster at the small of his back. "They cut the power to bypass the perimeter sensors," Dante whispered to Clara. "Stay here. Do not move." "Where are you going?" Clara hissed, grabbing his sleeve. "I'm going to kill them," Dante said calmly. "No, don't leave us." Clara surprised herself with the plea. It wasn't just fear for herself. She knew that if Dante left, the shield was gone. Dante looked at her in the shadows. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I have to draw their fire. If I stay, they shoot at the table. If I move, they shoot at me." He rolled out from under the table. Clara clamped her hands over Sophia's ears. She heard Dante shout something in Italian, a challenge. Then gunfire erupted loud and deafening. Dante was moving, firing as he ran toward the foyer, drawing the attackers away from the dining room. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at Sophia. The girl's eyes were squeezed shut, tears leaking out. "It's okay," Clara whispered, though she knew it wasn't. "Daddy is a superhero. He's winning." Suddenly, the dining room door creaked open. Not the main doors Dante had used, but the service entrance from the kitchen. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Clara held her breath. Was it Marco? A beam of a flashlight swept across the room. It played over the broken glass, the abandoned dinner. "Dante?" a voice called out softly. It was Julian. Clara felt a wave of relief, followed instantly by a wave of cold dread. Why was Julian whispering? Why didn't he turn on the emergency lights? And why did he have a gun drawn, pointing it not at the windows but scanning the floor? Sophia stiffened in Clara's arms. She began to whimper. Clara clamped a hand over the girl's mouth, her eyes widening. The drawing. The yellow-haired stick figure with the gun. Julian wasn't here to help. He was using the attack as cover. The flashlight beam moved closer to the table. Julian was humming, a low, eerie tune. "Come out, little princess," Julian whispered. "Uncle Julian is here to keep you safe. Just like I did for Mommy." The horror of the statement hit Clara like a physical blow. Just like I did for Mommy. He had killed Isabella. He had been the leak all along. And Sophia had seen it. That was why she didn't speak. She knew if she spoke, the man with the yellow hair would come back. The flashlight beam hit the tablecloth right in front of Clara's face. He knew they were there. Clara looked around desperately. On the floor near the table leg was the heavy silver pitcher of ice water. Julian grabbed the tablecloth and ripped it away. "Found we." Clara didn't wait. She swung the silver pitcher with every ounce of strength she possessed. It connected with Julian's kneecap with a sickening crunch. Julian screamed, his gun firing wildly into the ceiling as he collapsed. "Run!" Clara screamed, grabbing Sophia. They scrambled out from under the table, slipping on the spilled ice and water. Clara didn't look back. She dragged Sophia toward the main hall. "Bitch!" Julian howled behind them. He was hurt, but he was getting up. Clara burst into the hallway. It was chaos. Smoke flashing lights from the alarm system that had finally kicked in. "Dante!" she screamed. At the far end of the hall, Dante was standing over two bodies dressed in black tactical gear. He spun around at the sound of her voice. He saw them. He saw Clara running Sophia in tow. And he saw Julian limping out of the dining room, raising his gun, aiming at Clara's back. Time seemed to slow down. Dante was too far away. He couldn't reach them in time. But Sophia stopped. She didn't run. She turned around. She looked at Julian, the monster of her nightmares, the man who had silenced her for 3 years. She let go of Clara's hand. She pointed a small finger at him, and she screamed. "Murderer!" The word tore through her throat, raw and primal. It echoed off the marble walls louder than the gunshots. Julian flinched. The shock of the silent girl screaming his secret made him hesitate for a fraction of a second. That fraction was all Dante needed. Bang! Dante's shot was impossible. 50 feet through smoke past his own daughter. The bullet struck Julian in the right shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the floor. Dante didn't stop. He sprinted down the hall, a blur of fury. He reached Julian before the man could recover his weapon. Dante kicked the gun away and pinned his cousin to the floor with a boot to the throat. "What did she say?" Dante hissed, his voice trembling with a rage that shook the floorboards. "What did my daughter just call you?" Julian coughed blood, grinning through stained teeth. "She's crazy, Dante, just like her mother." Dante looked up at Sophia. Clara had fallen to her knees, wrapping her arms around the trembling child. Sophia was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that shook her tiny frame. The dam had broken. "He hurt Mommy," Sophia wailed, her voice hoarse but clear. "He made Mommy sleep in the car, with the red paint." The red paint. Blood. Dante looked back down at Julian. The realization washed over him. The betrayal. The grief. The 3 years of watching his daughter suffer, thinking it was trauma from the crash, when it was fear of the monster sleeping in the guest house. Dante pressed his boot harder. "Marco," he bellowed. Marco appeared from the smoke, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but alive. "Take him to the basement," Dante said. His voice was dead, void of all humanity. "Keep him alive. I want to have a very long conversation with him later." As Marco and Luca dragged the screaming Julian away, Dante collapsed to his knees. He didn't care about the bodies of the assassins in the hall. He crawled toward Clara and Sophia. He reached them and pulled them both into a crushing embrace. He buried his face in Sophia's neck, weeping openly. "I heard you, Tesoro," Dante sobbed. "I heard you. You saved us." Clara sat there, sandwiched between the weeping Mafia Don and his daughter, her heart slowly returning to a normal rhythm. She looked at Dante's hand, which was gripping her shoulder, as if she were the only thing anchoring him to the earth. She had broken the silence. But in doing so, she had unleashed a storm. The attack tonight wasn't just a hit. It was a coup attempt orchestrated by Julian. And now that it had failed, the rest of the families in New York would smell blood in the water. Dante pulled back, looking at Clara. His eyes were red intense and burning with a new emotion. "You saved her life," he whispered. "You figured it out." "She drew it," Clara said, her voice shaking. "She drew him in the car." Dante nodded slowly. He stood up and pulled Clara to her feet, then lifted Sophia into his arms. "We can't stay here," Dante said. "The estate is compromised." Julian gave them the codes. "We have to go to the safe house." "Where?" Clara asked. "A cabin in the Adirondacks, off the grid. No phones, no internet, just us." He looked at her, his gaze piercing. "You don't have to come. I can have Marco drive you to the airport. I'll give you $1 million. You can disappear. You'll be safe." Clara looked at the door, at the freedom that waited there. Then she looked at Sophia, who had her head on Dante's shoulder, watching Clara with wide, teary eyes. And she looked at Dante, the man who had just walked through fire for his family. "I'm not going anywhere," Clara said. "I still have to teach her how to draw a proper horse." Dante stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Let's go." The drive to the Adirondacks was a blur of highway lights and tension. They switched cars 3 times in New Jersey and Connecticut, a dizzying logistical dance orchestrated by Marco to shake any tails. By the time they reached the private access road near Lake Placid, the city rain had turned into a driving blizzard. The safe house wasn't the rustic shack Clara had imagined. It was a sprawling timber lodge hidden deep within a dense pine forest, accessible only by a single dirt road that was rapidly disappearing under the snow. It was fortified, stocked, and completely isolated. "We're here," Dante said, killing the engine of the nondescript pickup truck they had acquired in Albany. Sophia was asleep in the back seat, her head resting on Clara's lap. Clara looked out at the dark silhouette of the cabin. It looked peaceful, a stark contrast to the violence they had just fled. "Is it safe?" Clara asked, her voice hushed. "No place is truly safe," Dante replied, his eyes scanning the tree line. "But this is as close as it gets. No electronics, no signals. The walls are reinforced. We wait here until Marco clears the city." They carried the sleeping child inside. The interior was cold, smelling of cedar and wood smoke. Dante moved with efficient purpose, lighting the massive stone fireplace in the living room, while Clara found blankets. For the next 3 days, the world outside ceased to exist. It was just the 3 of them and Marco, who patrolled the perimeter like a restless wolf encased in a snow globe of silence. But the silence was different now. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the estate. It was a peaceful silence. Sophia was transforming. With the threat of Julian gone, the fear that had locked her voice away began to dissolve. She didn't speak in full sentences yet, but she hummed. She laughed. She asked for things: juice, up, draw. On the 4th night, a blizzard raged outside, howling against the windows. The power flickered and died, leaving them lit only by the roaring fire. Clara was sitting on the rug reading a storybook to Sophia by firelight. Dante sat in a leather armchair cleaning his gun. It was a jarring juxtaposition, the domestic warmth and the lethal weapon. "The end," Clara whispered, closing the book. Sophia yawned, her eyes drooping. She crawled off Clara's lap and walked over to Dante. She climbed up onto his lap, heedless of the gun parts on the table next to him. Dante froze. He looked at his daughter with an expression of terrified awe. Sophia rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Daddy," she murmured sleepily. Stay. Dante's hand trembled as he stroked her hair. I'm staying, Tesoro. I'm right here. After Sophia fell asleep and they carried her to the master bedroom, which they had given to her for safety, Dante and Clara returned to the fire. Dante poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to Clara. You realized something today, Dante said, staring into the flames. What? Clara took a sip. The liquid burned pleasantly, warming her chest. You realized I'm not a good man, Dante said. You saw me kill my own cousin. You saw me shoot without hesitation. And yet you're still here. You're not cowering. Clara looked at him. The firelight danced on his sharp features, highlighting the exhaustion and the burden he carried. I saw a father protecting his child, Clara said. Julian was a monster. He hurt her to get to you. That's not family. That's a parasite. Dante turned to look at her. His eyes were intense, stripping away her defenses. Why did you really stay, Clara, at the estate when I gave you the out? You could be in Paris right now, with $1 million. Clara set her glass down. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the swirling snow. Because I was the girl who didn't speak once, she admitted softly. Dante stood up. He moved silently across the room until he was standing just behind her. She could feel the heat radiating from him. Tell me, he whispered. My father left when I was 6, Clara said, watching her breath fog the glass. My mother fell apart. I stopped talking for a year, because I thought if I was quiet enough he'd come back. He never did. No one came to save me. I had to save myself. She turned to face him. I saw Sophia, and I saw myself. But she has you. You came for her. You fought for her. That makes you a good man, Dante. Maybe a dangerous one, but a good one. Dante stared at her, his resolve crumbling. The distance between them seemed to vanish. I haven't felt good in a long time, he murmured. He reached out his hand, cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed her lower lip. Clara's breath hitched. Dante, I shouldn't, he said, his voice rough. You're under my protection. This crosses a line. We crossed the line when you kidnapped me from a diner. Clara whispered, a small smile playing on her lips. Dante let out a low groan and closed the distance. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate. It was a kiss born of adrenaline fear and days of simmering tension. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer. He tasted of whiskey and danger. His hands tangled in her hair, his grip possessing. For a moment, the Mafia, the hit men, the millions of dollars, it all faded. There was just the man and the woman in the firelight. But the moment was shattered by the sound of the front door slamming open. Dante broke the kiss instantly, spinning around his body, shielding Clara. He reached for the gun on the table, but it was too far. It was Marco. He stumbled into the room, covered in snow, his face pale. "Boss!" Marco gasped, clutching his side. Blood was seeping through his fingers. "They found us." Dante was at his side in a second. "Who Julian is in the basement back in New York." "Not Julian," Marco wheezed. "Moretti, the Moretti family. Julian sold the location to them before you shot him. He had a dead man's switch on his phone." Dante cursed, a wood string of Italian profanity. The Moretti family were their oldest rivals, brutal and without honor. If they were here, they weren't here to talk. They were here to wipe the Vancini line off the map. "How many?" Dante demanded. 6, maybe 8. They have the perimeter. I took one out, but I got tagged. Dante dragged Marco to the sofa. Clara, get the first aid kit from the kitchen. Then get Sophia. We're leaving. We can't leave, Marco grunted. They disabled the truck. Tires are slashed, and they're watching the road. Dante looked at the window. The snow was coming down harder. They were trapped. Okay, Dante said, his voice turning icy calm. The lover was gone. The Don was back. If they want a war, we give them a war. He looked at Clara. Can you shoot? Clara's hands were shaking as she handed him the first aid kit. No. Dante grabbed a smaller pistol from his ankle holster and pressed it into her hand. It was heavy and cold. Point and pull, Dante said. Take Sophia to the basement. There is a panic room behind the wine rack. Lock it from the inside. Do not open it for anyone but me. If anyone else tries to get in, he looked at the gun in her hand. You don't hesitate. You understand. Dante, Clara said, terror gripping her throat. What are you going to do? Dante checked the magazine of his main weapon. He walked to the door, killed the lights, and looked out into the white void. I'm going to remind the Morettis why they used to be afraid of the dark. The basement panic room was cold and smelled of damp earth. Clara huddled in the dark, clutching the heavy pistol Dante had given her. Beside her, Sophia lay curled on a cot wearing noise-cancelling headphones, humming softly to block out the nightmare unfolding above. Upstairs, the cabin shuddered under the assault. Dante moved through the darkened hallways like a ghost. He had flipped the heavy oak dining table for cover, trading fire with the 6 mercenaries surrounding the house. Marco was already down, bleeding out on the sofa from a gut shot, clutching a shotgun he was too weak to lift. Vancini! Enzo Moretti's voice boomed from the snowy darkness outside. Give us the girl, or we burn this place down. Dante fired back, taunting them, refusing to yield. But then the shooting stopped. Check your phone, Dante, Enzo shouted. Dante pulled out his burner. A picture message showed a man on the roof of the cabin, tilting a canister over the ventilation shaft. Nerve agent. Enzo lied. It was gasoline, but the threat was effectively the same. It sinks. Your little girl won't even wake up. Dante froze. The panic room was reinforced, but the air intake wasn't military grade. If they poured gas down the vents, Clara and Sophia would die in minutes. He looked at Marco, who shook his head weakly, but Dante knew the math. He had to buy them time. Stop! Dante screamed. He dropped his empty magazine and placed his weapon on the floor. I'm coming out. Dante walked out the front door, hands raised, stepping into the blinding high beams of the SUVs. Enzo Moretti stepped forward, wearing a thick fur coat and a cruel smirk. He wasted no time pistol-whipping Dante across the face. Dante fell to his knees in the snow, tasting blood. You embarrassed my father, Enzo spat, leveling his gun at Dante's forehead. You think I'm going to let you live? I'm going to kill you, then I'm going to go downstairs and finish the bloodline. Enzo cocked the hammer. Say goodbye, Iron King. But Enzo hadn't counted on Clara. She hadn't stayed in the panic room. Realizing Dante was surrendering, she had squeezed through the narrow coal chute and shimmied up the icy trellis to the roof. Perched precariously on the frozen shingles, wearing only a sweater, she leveled Marco's backup revolver. She didn't aim for Enzo. She knew she'd miss. She aimed for the jerry can in the hands of the man by the vent. Bang! The bullet struck the metal can. The fumes ignited instantly. A massive fireball erupted on the roof, knocking the henchman off and showering the porch below with burning fuel and debris. The explosion threw Enzo forward, knocking him flat into the snow. Dante didn't hesitate. He lunged. He tackled Enzo, ripping the submachine gun from his hands and spraying bullets to suppress the other gunmen scrambling away from the fire. "Clara!" he screamed, looking up just in time to see her lose her grip on the icy roof. She slid helplessly off the edge and plummeted into a deep snowbank below. Enzo scrambled up, pulling a knife since he had lost his gun. "Kill them all!" Dante tossed the empty gun aside and met Enzo hand to hand in the snow. Rage fueled him. He caught Enzo's wrist, headbutted him with a sickening crunch, and drove him face first into the hood of the SUV. "Stay down," Dante growled. The remaining gunmen regrouped, raising their weapons to execute Dante. But suddenly, sirens pierced the night. Red and blue lights flooded the driveway. "FBI, drop your weapons." The Moretti crew froze. Getting arrested was bad. A shootout with the feds was suicide. They dropped their guns and raised their hands. Dante looked at the lead officer. It wasn't the FBI. It was Officer O'Malley, a corrupt cop on Dante's payroll leading a staged raid. "You'll need a priest, Enzo," Dante whispered as the SWAT team zip-tied the attackers. Dante didn't wait for the cleanup. He sprinted to the snowbank under the eaves. Clara was lying there, pale and shivering violently from the fall. "Did I get him?" she asked weakly. Dante scooped her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. "You got him, Clara. You saved us all." "I drew a heart," she whispered, her eyes fluttering shut as consciousness faded. "With fire this time." Dante held her tight, screaming for a medic as the adrenaline finally crashed. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the first thing Clara heard. She blinked against the harsh hospital lights to find Dante sitting by her bedside, looking like he hadn't slept in a week. His tactical gear was gone, replaced by a clean t-shirt, but the exhaustion was etched deep into his features. "You're awake," he rasped, pouring her water with a trembling hand. He explained the fallout quickly. Marco was out of surgery and already complaining about the hospital food, and Enzo Moretti was in federal custody. The fake FBI raid had created enough confusion to plant evidence in Enzo's trunk. He wouldn't see the sun for 20 years. The war was over. But Dante wasn't celebrating. He stared at the floor, his jaw tight. "I have the papers ready," he said quietly. "A new identity. A passport. A deed to a house in Tuscany. You can go there, paint, and be safe. I almost got you killed, Clara. I can't watch that happen again." Clara ignored the sharp pain in her cracked ribs and sat up. She reached out, grabbing his shirt collar and pulling him down until their faces were inches apart. "I didn't jump off a roof for a paycheck, Dante," she whispered fiercely. "And I didn't do it for a house in Tuscany. I did it because I love her. And God help me, I love you." Dante froze. The Iron King mask crumbled, leaving just a man terrified of his own heart. "I'm a criminal, Clara. I have blood on my hands." "And I have chocolate syrup on mine," she countered. "We're a mess, but we're a mess together. Don't you dare send me away unless you don't love me." He searched her eyes for fear and found only steel. With a ragged sigh of surrender, he closed the distance. "I've loved you since the moment you stood up to me in the diner." He kissed her, then a desperate, tender seal of a promise. The door creaked open. "Daddy." Sophia stood in the doorway. She climbed onto the bed, careful of the IV lines, and handed Clara a piece of paper. It was a drawing of 3 stick figures, holding hands under a giant yellow sun. Beneath them, written in shaky crayon letters, was a single word: family. "She speaks," Clara whispered, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "She speaks," Dante smiled, stroking his daughter's hair. "And she knows exactly what she's saying." 6 months later. The bell above the Golden Heart diner chimed. The place was packed, but the regulars weren't just eating toast. They were staring at the man behind the counter. Dante Vanchini, the most feared man in New York, was wearing a black polo shirt and pouring coffee. He wasn't the boss today. He was the barista. Clara walked out of the kitchen, looking radiant as the new owner. She wrapped an arm around Dante's waist. "Table 4 needs a refill, handsome." "I'm on it, boss." Dante winked. "Daddy, look." Sophia was sitting at table 4, her books spread out. She held up a test paper with a big red A on it. "The teacher said I got all the answers right." She beamed. "But she said I talk too much in class." Dante threw his head back and laughed, a loud, booming sound that filled the diner. It was the sound of a man who had walked through hell and come out the other side holding an angel's hand. "That's my girl," Dante said, kissing Clara's temple. "Never stop talking, Sophia. Never stop." Sometimes the loudest cries for help are the ones that make no sound at all. Dante Vanchini thought money and power could fix his broken family, but it took a waitress with a bottle of chocolate syrup to understand that healing isn't about force, it's about connection. Clara and Dante's story reminds us that love often shows up in the most unexpected places amidst danger and silence, and that true family isn't just about blood, but about who is willing to walk through the fire for you. Did this story keep you on the edge of your seat? Would you have had the courage to stand up to a mob boss to save a child? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey of suspense and romance, please like this video. Share it with a friend who loves a good twist, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching.